Jane Addams was born in Cedarville, Illinois on September 6, 1860. Like many of the theorists we have studied so far, Addams grew up in a well-off family. She was probably the most economically advantaged theorist that we've learned about so far. In fact, her father was a member of the Senate, as well as a successful businessman, and even knew Abraham Lincoln. Addams and her father were very close, and he was a significant influence on her life. She never knew her mother, as she died in childbirth when Addams was only 2, but her father remarried when Addams was 8 years old, and her stepmother Anna was an advocate for caring for the poor, which influenced Addams' own activism. The 8th of 9 children, Addams was mainly raised by her older sisters, and like Martineau, she suffered health issues throughout her life. When she was 4 years old, she was diagnosed with Pott's disease, which caused a curvature of her spine and somewhat limited her ability to walk. Addams never married, and there's been historical speculation that she was a lesbian and that there are few women who are believed to have been her romantic partners. At the encouragement of her father, Addams attended college, which was very rare for women at this time. She graduated from Rockford Female Seminary, now Rockford University, in 1881 at the top of her class. That summer, her father died from appendicitis, and Jane and her siblings inherited $50,000, which is about $1.3 million in today's money. That fall, she joined her sister at the Women's Medical College of Philadelphia, but while she was there, her spine continued to cause problems for her. Her brother-in-law attempted to perform surgery on her, and a nervous breakdown ended up causing her to withdraw from medical school. During this time, she decided to return home to care for her stepmother. While back at home, she entered a period where she was unsure of what to do with her life. So she decided to travel to Europe, where she spent the next 4 years traveling across Europe, and occasionally coming back to the US. Through her travels, she realized that she did not need a medical degree to help the poor, and in the summer of 1887, she wrote a magazine article about settlement houses, safe places in cities where people, especially those in poverty-stricken and immigrant neighborhoods, could get access to medical care, food, job education, and other services. In 1887, Addams and friends visited Toynbee Hall in London, the first settlement house. Inspired, Addams and Ellen Gates Starr then founded a settlement house on the industrial west side of Chicago called Hull House. Jane invested much of her own money in the house, but they eventually received contributions from wealthy supporters. Addams and Starr were later joined by women who had become leading progressive reformers: Florence Kelley, Julia Lathrop, Sophonisba Breckinridge, Alice Hamilton, and Grace and Edith Abbott. As it grew in popularity, the Hull House became a college of sorts, as it became a center for research and debate. Some of this research included housing concerns, spread of diseases, and drug use, topics that are still popular among sociologists today. In 1891, Dr. Harriet Rice, who was not able to practice at any hospital in the US due to racial discrimination, offered medical treatment for poor families at Hull House. At this time, Hull House was hosting 2,000 visitors each week. The period between 1880 and 1920 in America was a period of dramatic social change. One of the results of this was a development of the social reform movements known as Progressivism. The city of Chicago was the epicenter of these changes and of progressivism during this time. Addams was one of the key leaders in this movement, so, like Marx, we must understand her social theory as being heavily influenced by her activism and by the social backdrop of the time. Along with other progressive women reformers, Addams was instrumental in successfully lobbying for the establishment of a juvenile court system, better urban sanitation and factory laws, protective labor legislation for women, and more playgrounds and kindergartens throughout Chicago. In 1907, Addams was a founding member of the National Child Labor Committee, which played a significant role in passage of a federal child labor law in 1916. Addams led an initiative to establish a School of Social Work at the University of Chicago, creating institutional support for a new profession for women. Addams also served as president of the National Conference for Charities and Corrections from 1909 to 1915, and was the first woman to hold that title. She also became active in the women's suffrage movement as an officer in the National American Women's Suffrage Association and pro-suffrage columnist. She was also among the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. During World War I, Addams found her second major calling, promoting international peace. As an avowed pacifist, she protested U.S. entry into World War I, which dinged her popularity and promoted harsh criticism from some newspapers. Addams, however, believed human beings were capable of solving disputes without violence. She joined a group of women peace activists who toured the warring nations, hoping to bring about peace. In 1915, she headed the Women's Peace Party, and shortly thereafter also became president of the International Congress of Women. Addams wrote articles and gave speeches worldwide promoting peace, and she helped found the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in 1919, serving as its president until 1929, and honorary president until her death in 1935. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts in 1931, the first American woman to receive the award. She also wrote a book about her work at the Hull House, as well as other books promoting peace. A heart attack in 1929 took a toll on her health, and though she pushed on, she never fully recovered. Addams died on May 21, 1935. Within the progressive movement of the time, Addams explored many theoretical discussions that were largely centered on the role that the state should have in ameliorating, or making better, conditions of social and economic injustice. Progressives such as Addams argued that constitutional principles and social science logic demanded an activist, enlightened state. Like Marx and Martineau, Addams was against a laissez-faire philosophy of government, which advocated for limited regulation. This philosophy was influenced by the social Darwinist theories of Herbert Spencer, which argued that government regulation would impede societal progress. Progressives such as Addams countered this argument by advocating for reform social Darwinism, which argued that humans had evolved to a point where their intelligence could and must assume control of evolution, and that government should be an expression of the combined intelligence of members of society. Addams and other progressives at this time felt that reformist action must counterbalance capitalist expansionism in order to ameliorate the human pain produced by that expansion, and the government was the only social structure with the power and resources adequate to this task. However, she was also concerned that the state would act upon reform without necessary knowledge of the everyday life of its citizens, and thus enact policies that did additional harm. Like Martineau, Addams believed that it was sociologists' duty to reform and improve upon society. Addams was also influenced by the philosophy of pragmatism. Pragmatism addressed the issue of the connection between truth and action, and knowledge and experience. William James, one of the formulators of this philosophy, claimed that the truth of any proposition lay in its practical consequences, its usefulness, and its workability. So no idea could be true that did not work. This may sound reasonable to us now, but at the time this philosophy was not as widely held as it is today. Pragmatism asserted that truth must be based on hypotheses that were tested and confirmed through experience. So pragmatism was the foundation upon which Addams built her conviction that the truth of any sociological theory lay in its ability to present solutions to real-life issues. Addams's social theory was entirely based on her goal of ameliorating social inequality and bringing about social change. She believed that a social ethic was needed as a prevailing principle of conduct in society. Addams's theories were highly grounded in her experience and observations at Hull House and of progressive activism. And like Martineau, it was essential that her work was accessible, not written just for the academic audience. In fact, she took the settlement resident as her prototype of the sociologist, someone who was learning from the actualities of lived experience. Like with Martineau, the textbook identifies 4 major themes in Addams's work. The first is that, for Addams, the work of the sociologist is to analyze the situation at hand in order to bring about ameliorative social change in the world in which the situation occurs. This means that her social theory was based on the assumption that society had room for improvement. Addams has 2 main epistemological statements. First, that knowledge of social life can be gained only through direct social experiences, And second, that the knower is responsible toward the subject and situation as they become known. So she believed that life could be learned only through experience, only through interactive participation in society. A participation that must at its heart have a desire to alleviate social problems. Like Martineau, Addams also saw importance of sympathy. She believed that the sociologist must combine sympathetic understanding with the information of the statistician in their analysis of society and social problems. While she herself did not employ quantitative methodologies, she was highly supportive of them. Like Weber's concept of Verstehen, she believed in fully understanding the meanings attributed to the objects of her study. She also emphasized that the sociologist must not lose the subject's viewpoint in the sociological account. She emphasized having members of the community to hold her accountable in her generalizations, and insisted upon an interactional relationship between the researchers and the subject of the research. While this logic was looked down upon during the middle of the 1900s, when positivism was at its height, it has gained great popularity in contemporary qualitative research. The second is that Addams's method of doing theory is to report and analyze the situation at hand as a narrative of multiple vantage points. The method that Addams employed in her theory building was the use of narratives, or a story involving characters and events told in chronological sequence and making some attributions of cause. This strategy allows her to stay true to the situation at hand and the lived experiences of the various actors. It also brings her to the most consistent theme in her social theory, the collision and viewpoints between differently situated actors. Addams emphasized that individual actors are situated within their own experiences, and that these experiences are grounded in personal history, and that individuals assign meanings to their actions and the actions of others. So it was essential to understand those meanings and the history of the people who held them. Addams used narratives of individual people, commonly women, as an example of a social type. In other words, a person who lived at the intersection of various biographies and histories, who could then represent people who lived at similar intersections. She also used narratives of people who shared different histories and intersections of biography and history in order to reflect on the differences in their vantage points. The third theme is that the individual social being is an embodied agentic subjectivity motivated by interests and ethics. In simpler terms, this means that Addams highlighted the importance of individuals having visceral experiences. In other words, certain aspects of their lived experiences were experienced through the body, as well as their positions as thinking and acting beings who were motivated by their own subjective experiences in and beliefs about the world and what is right and wrong. The individual is therefore the basic unit of Addams' social theory, which allows her to focus her analysis on her subjects' lives and to see the direct impact of social factors upon them. She also heavily focused on the intersection of class, gender, ethnicity, and age in their personal narratives and their impact on the body. She discussed the limits that these factors impose upon individuals and their own agency. Fourth, Addams' social theory outlines society's essential characteristics, describes their particular configuration in American society, and analyzes how that configuration must change if America is to be transformed into a socialized democracy. At the time that Addams was writing, America was transforming from a rural agricultural to an urban industrial society. These changes brought about Addams' belief that a transformation of ethics was needed. She argued that the old human ethics had been carried over from the rural agricultural era into the urban industrial era, and that this had caused contradictions. She also believed that the old social ethic legitimized domination. Like Marx, Addams was deeply concerned with the industrialization and working conditions that they brought. And like Marx, she saw factory work as dominating on the part of the factory owners onto the workers. A hyper-individualized ethic legitimized, Addams argued, people such as the millionaire businessman George Pullman, with a rationale for dominating his workers and allowing them no say in the governance of the business and the company town in which they lived. The textbook authors place Addams and the other women discussed in this text into the category of the second-generation founders of sociology. This distinction is made by allocating those who wrote between 1830 and 1870 as the first generation of founders, and those writing between 1890 and 1930 as the second generation of founders. Those in the second generation are seen as building upon the themes developed among the first generation and saw sociology established as an academic discipline. At the time that Addams was writing, the establishment of sociology as an academic discipline was just emerging. During this movement, sociology divorced itself from activism in an effort to gain legitimacy. Addams refused to accept this division between those who think and those who do, and instead held her belief that sociological theory must be created through active community engagement, and that it must be used for application in the world. However, this distinction between academic sociology and public sociology was very successful, and those who could not attain academic positions, in other words, women and racially subjugated groups, were excluded from legitimate social theorizing. The sociological theorizing that emerged during this time in academic circles was intentionally made to stand apart from the everyday life theorizing that Martineau, Addams, and other women scholars that we'll learn about opposed. It sought general theory that was not situated in history, biography, or context as scholars like Addams saw it. Rather, it was supposed to transcend any one person's lived experience. We saw this in Durkheim's typologies of suicide, and we'll see it in Weber's typologies of power, action, and stratification. This type of theorizing was prominent in sociology up until very recently, as scholars have begun to recognize the subjectivity of all social theorizing and the need to recognize these subjectivities rather than pretend that they are not there. We'll learn more about the critiques of this generalized process of theorizing when we learn about Black feminist thought. Addams's work is part of a long history of feminist sociology. The components of her feminist paradigm include a gendered standpoint, a focus on women's lives, the exploration of multiple vantage points, the invention of a research methodology respectful of these multiple vantage points, and a commitment to change. Addams's gendered standpoint is evident in her constant recognition of herself as a woman in her social theory. Rather than shy away from a gendered account of the social world, she constantly reminds the reader of her presence in the world as a woman and how it affects her observations. She is also adamant about locating herself within a specific class, ethnicity, age, time, and place, and reflects on the ways in which these social factors influence the way in which she exists in the world. While Addams then was an embodiment of a specific type of woman, others, such as the woman scrubbing floors, represents another. So she focused her work primarily on women's lives, but without ignoring the multiple meanings attributed to womanhood and the many ways in which gender intersects with other social positions, such as class, ethnicity, as well as time and place. This emphasis on multiple vantage points comprised her feminist research method, which emphasized how differences in social location and status impacts knowledge of the social world. Addams's feminist research method, like much of contemporary feminism today, sought a society that was based on inclusivity, empowerment, and respect for contradictions. However, unlike Martineau, Addams believed that the people must use their discomforts to create democratic, cooperative, and diverse associations. So whereas Martineau believed that change was in the hands of the wealthy elite in recognizing that wealth should be shared, Addams believed that it was in the hands of the working class and women to change society.